Hi, welcome to episode 121 of Retropower Uncut. And I'm going to start this episode, as I often do, with a coffee. Now, I doubt it'll have gone unnoticed that we've been working with Roundstone Coffee for quite a few months now. However, it goes further than just them supplying us with the wonderful coffee. We've actually been working on our own blend together. Now, I'm not sure you should necessarily trust the taste of somebody who largely survives on Bovril, but we have come up with a blend that we think is absolutely awesome. It's what is in our machine, and now, rather proudly, you can actually buy Retropower coffee in bean form or ground form, so you too can drink the exact coffee that we have in the exact mugs we drink it from. Who'd have thought that 13 years ago when we thought, shall we mess around with cars and see if we can make a living out of it? Right, anyway, on the subject of messing around with cars, let's go and have a look what's going on. Officer Hipperson there. Right, I'm going to start over here. So, excitingly, the engine arrived last week for the E-Type, which has been built elsewhere. Certainly visually looks like an excellent job, I can't complain about that. So we are on the countdown actually to being able to get that in the car. I think the next step is we're going to get it rolling. We've got a little bit of a wait on the gearbox. We're doing a Tremec T5 5-speed conversion, which is a reasonably common conversion. Elite transmissions are doing their version basically, which has a modified tail housing to make it the same length as the standard E-Type box, so the shifter remains in the same place. So we're just waiting for them to build that up. In the meantime, we'll probably get it rolling, and then we'll be able to get engine and gearbox mated up. So yeah, good. Very excited about that. And I suppose the other thing that we're waiting on before we can get it rolling is the wheels. But I know Torino are in the very latter stages. I think we're probably a week away from having the wheels for it as well, so that's good. Other areas, we've been focusing on some of the upgrade areas we're doing. I think I talked last week about, or possibly Nat did actually, I think I talked the week before, about the aircon / heater box arrangement and the fact that we were trying to come up with our own system that actually has a flapper control that changes the air direction between the heater matrix and the AC evaporator. So we've actually got flapper control of the temperature that doesn't always blow through both matrices. And to that end, we're going to make use of some of the space where the battery normally is on a right-hand drive car by actually relocating the battery over to the opposite side where the air filter would normally be, because that's not going to be there with our throttle body setup. And then make use of that then redundant space on the near side of the passenger side of the car. So George has 3D scanned all of that area, so we can then, and also the bonnet shape, so we can visualise all of that area there and the part where it feeds through into the car in CAD, and then we can design the new heater box casing in CAD, which will probably be a composite part. So we'll design the part and then from that draw up the moulds to make the fiberglass or carbon parts to the shell that will house all of that. So yeah, first step on that. And then also the dash. We've just thrown in the sections of dash because we're trying to work out some of the modifications we're going to make to the dash. So as part of the heat and aircon system upgrade, we want to put some vents in the dash. Because essentially on the original you've got some sort of under dash vents, you've got demist vents, but there's nothing really that you can direct straight at your face. So we're going to tweak the left-hand side, the glove box side, get rid of the little grab handle, adjust the shape of the glove box opening so we can get a vent on there, and then if we lose some of the warning lights on the driver's side, we're going to be able to get a vent in there. So we're going to get rid of the brake warning light and actually relocate that into the tacho, and we're going to put an oil pressure warning light in the tacho as well. And then that actually leads us on to a further discussion. We were planning on doing some stepper motor instruments for it, so that we can connect them and all the other instruments via CAN bus from our engine ECU. Because one of the bugbears I've had over the years of doing kind of cars where we've got engine ECU that's got all the sensors for temperature, pressure, etc., and then you have to duplicate all those sensors for the instruments. and it's a much nicer setup if you can actually just use the engine ECU so the sensors feed that, and then you just have 2 wires from that, the CAN output on the ECU, which can then theoretically control all the gauges with the right processor in there. That then also links into a little bit of amusing, but I need to have a chat with the customer. I was wondering about whether we ditch the analog instruments altogether and put a big LCD screen in front of the steering wheel and actually recreate the look of the Smith's gauges digitally. So this is an idea that's at the back of my mind. I don't know whether he'll go for it or not. It depends really whether he's keen to have really classic looking analog gauges or whether that's a cool idea or not. So watch this space on that. Morris. George has been on with the door builds, finally got through the 3D print metal parts we've been waiting for, which is essentially a bit that bolt inside the door here, which the new billet handles pivot on. They have also come back from anodising since last week, and that was the last piece of the puzzle really. So George has been on with assembling the doors, so he's got those mounts in, got the handles in, the mini lock mechanisms are in there, the central locking actuators are in and connected, and then he's been getting the door frames in and assembled. These are billet parts which were machined some time ago. They've just been sort of sat waiting for us to have all the parts of the puzzle in place. So we've got those in, which hold the modified frame. If you sort of throw your mind back, normally there is a divider here and a separate quarter glass. So this is not only a modified frame, this is a machined billet part to fill in that corner, mount it all and hold the wing mirror, and then it's custom glass as well. So yeah, he's been getting all that lot together, trialling the electric windows, making sure everything opens and shuts properly and that the windows go nicely up into their channels when the doors are open, shut, whatever. Yeah, and it's all coming together. Still a little bit of tweaking to do. We've got to do the seals that sit along here. We're just kind of in the mock-up build to make sure it all functions properly, and then we'll move on to the final build where we'll do this, put sealant around things to make sure this is all weather tight. But it is looking very good, and I have to say it's surprising how much more modern it's made it look around here. I think perhaps the combination of the black frame and the single piece glass and the handles sort of transformed it a bit as well, and it's made more of a difference. And this is the kind of look I would hoped it would have, but it's made more of a difference than I thought it would. So yeah, very excited to see that lot come together. What's the other thing on this? Oh, James has been doing some work in the boot, so we're just basically building and planning and building the panel work that's going to line the boot, which will all be upholstered. So there'll be a panel that covers the fuel tank, a panel each side which will be upholstered. We're just doing a little panel at the back which covers the actuator that releases the boot and some wiring that runs in the back there. And then there'll be a carpet that will be made to go over that. And I know that Dean's in the latter stages of the remaining interior stuff as well. And one other last thing actually was maybe 3D printing at the minute is the gear knob. So we've done the design for the gear knob now. There's a 3D print on at the minute, but we concluded it was a bit small looking at that, which illustrates the value of a 3D print because it looked good in the drawings. So that's with 3D printing a bigger version now, a scaled up version, see how that looks. But I think we're on the right track with that. So yeah, that kind of keystone of needing that 3D printed part in the door has now allowed a load of parts to be completed. So this should transform pretty rapidly now. The CVA is just round here to create some space really. I think you saw they were getting the body mocked up on that last week. Next step on that is to get the guys from KS Composites over, once we've set the body position, to lay up the flanges that mount the body to the chassis around the rear end. And then as soon as the guys have finished on the Charger, we can then start making some more progress on this, finalising all the bonnet shape, ready to get that off for carbon moulding. So yeah, that's poised, ready for further progress. You might as well stay here, Jamie, I think. Manta, finally, the gearbox came back from rebuild. So I can see it, in fact, on the side over there. Adam's just dropped the engine out, so we're going to get the gearbox mated up. Bobby's reassembled all of the shifter mechanism, which he'd finished before the gearbox went for rebuild. So that is ready to go back in the car now, and then that's back to the point where it can actually be pretty much in a drivable state. And then John's done a few more assembly jobs on that. We were just trying to get the door builds finished on that too. So we've got the handles and locks in, all the window guides are in. I think we were just waiting for the door seals, which the owner dropped off yesterday. And then we're still frustratingly waiting on the titanium bolts. the owner organised ordering the titanium bolts for the split rim wheels, half of which were in stock and have arrived, and the other half were back order, which we're still waiting for. So as soon as we get those here, we can get those wheels on. I feel like that's like a repeat thing. I probably say that every week on this car. We'll have the wheel bolts for the wheels soon. Land Cruiser over there. James has been on with the exhaust system. I think we saw that being constructed, but this week saw it completely finished. That's all tied up, and that also allowed another job to be done, which we've been waiting for because we wanted the exhaust in first, which was the transmission oil dipstick and tube, which originally its path crossed through where the exhaust now is, and we knew that was going to be the case, so we were holding fire on designing that until we've got the exhaust in. But now that's done, James has now made up and fitted that transmission dipstick tube. So that's another job ticked off, and I have seen some sneak peek photos of the inlet manifold, which is in progress on that, and that's almost like the Morris door mechanism of the Land Cruiser world, in that that's the one thing that's sort of holding up progress on it, and it's holding up various things in the engine bay. But as soon as we've got that, we can finish off all of the remaining jobs in the engine bay, and that'll be more or less a firing up point. And we also, I've just saw it out the corner of my eye, we've received the front louver panel for the Stratos now as well. That was done all by KS Composites. So George drew that front louver panel, drew the tooling to, which was going to be the mould to make it, and then we handed the rest of the job to KS Composites. So they machined the tool in MDF and made the actual final part in fiberglass, which arrived yesterday. So that can now be trial fitted. We'll hand it over to the guys to paint it. Yeah, so that's, and then I suppose on the subject of KS Composites, the E-Type Project Norman, you will notice is not next door, because that has now gone over to KS Composites to mould the bonnet. So watch this space on that, and we may actually head over there at some point and show some of their work at their place. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat, and he'll show you what's going on with the metal shop. And I'll see you next week.
Not going to mention the NSU or the Mustang?
Nah, bollocks. I knew there was something. It's because it's not here. I've got no visual cue.
I thought you were
hello, I'm back. As James just pointed out, I completely neglected the Mustang, mainly because I had no visual cue because it's not here. But yes, the guys were out testing the Mustang last week. So James and Adam have been out doing a fair bit of road mileage on it. I think Nat mentioned last week that they went out in it and there was a tweak needed on the master cylinder. It wasn't releasing all the way, so the front brakes were binding. Anyway, that was resolved, and it's done some miles since, and that's all gone really well. And then the owner came over on, must have been Tuesday, I think, to choose the final colour for the stripes that were going onto it. And then the car has now gone to Detail by Dale for its final detailing. And that kind of ties in with the stripes as well, because we wanted to do the machine polishing on all the areas where the stripes go before the stripes went on, but then the ceramic coating afterwards. So he has now done the machine polishing. The guy who's doing the graphics went over yesterday, applied the stripes, and he's now finishing off the polishing, and then I think tomorrow we'll be doing the ceramics, so we should see that back here next week. So looking forward to seeing that, hoping we can keep it looking mint, given that the weather's not amazing at the minute. And then the only other thing was NSU brake calipers. The owner of that also came over. So loads of visits. The owner of that came over at the weekend, dropped off a few bits, dropped off the door seals, and then just went through a few more jobs he wanted to do on it. So one was the bumpers. He wanted the bumpers prepping and fitting. So we've got them out. They're stainless steel, so you can repair dents by hammering them out and body filing them. So Scott's been working on that, basically working out any little dents in them, filing them, sanding them, and getting to the point that they're ready to polish up. So then they can be polished and fitted. And then the brake calipers, we'd previously stripped them down and plated them, and then the car got put on hold a while back, just at the point we were trying to source the bolts for them, which are really unusual. They have M9 bolts with like quite a flat cap head with a female Torx socket in it. So we were just trying to source some replacement bolts for that of the original type. And the little seals, there's like a little O-ring seal where the fluid passes from one half of the caliper to the other. But it looks like we've sorted that, so we're back on with basically building those calipers up. And then I think there were 1 or 2 other little jobs he gave us at the weekend. Little tick off things he wanted doing before we hand it back to him to finish the work. So we'll be trickling through those. And on that note, I'm going to hand over once again, this time actually, to Nat to show you what's going on in the metal shop. And I'll see you next week rather than in about 2 seconds when I forget something. They were, though. Right, well, hello folks, and welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut from the fabrication and body shop area. And we're going to start with Mark 1 Escort. Hopefully you'll be glad to hear that we won't be starting with the Mark 1 Escort on this jig for too much longer now. There'll be something new here, so it won't be too long to wait now. I can assure, I can imagine that a few people are getting a little bit bored of the fact that we're starting and finishing in here with an Escort every time, but that's just the way it is with building cars. So we're going to start with this. Sam's literally working on it now, giving me a twinge of a twinge in my eye, but he's carrying on. He's doing the seam brazing, so that's what we'll start talking about on this body shell. You'll have heard it, the term mentioned with regard to rally cars. Probably people talk about stitch welding a body shell. It's basically adding stiffness to the shell and reinforcing the shell by supplementing the original spot welded seams by short sections of weld added to joints on the car. The failing with well, it's not a failing, it's just part of the design of a spot welded seam. You need 2 flanges put together, say like that. You just spot weld there, like that. The problem is that corner can pull open and flex like that. So there is flex there. If you put a weld on that corner there, it means that can no longer pull down and pull back to the weld. It means that's more solid. So what we do is add some stitches to those seams to reinforce them. The downside to that is that you can add too much and stiffen the shell too much, and that causes cracking. So there's a good halfway house to find on this job, which is putting stitches along each of the spot welded seams. And that's what we're doing. There's a further bit of logic to what we do here, where we don't actually use weld as such on those. We use a type of brazing. It's TIG deposited, as you could just see then. We use a rod called a Sifsil Copper 968, which is a copper silicon alloy. It's called silicon bronze. It's a copper silicon alloy, and we deposit it in stitches along the weld seams. It's very dirt tolerant to put on, and inevitably on older body shells there's dirt in the seams. It's very hard to get defect-free welds on those seams because the dirt boils out of them. Defects boil out and oxides boil out of the seam as you weld them. It basically means you get porosity in your weld, which is always a good way to start cracking. So what we do is we use Sifsil Copper 968 rod. It's extremely crack resistant. It's only a fraction less tensile strength than mild steel. It's 340 newtons a square mil as opposed to 350 newtons a square mil tensile. So it's more or less the same tensile strength as mild steel, but it's deposited at a lower temperature. You don't need to melt the base metal, and it's extremely neat. It's dirt tolerant, crack resistant. It's really the way to go for stitch welding rather than using actual weld. So that's what Sam's on with there. He's also been doing some work on the inner wing, doing a cutout this side. Scott's done the one that side. Sam's done the one this side. This one's for, as you remember from the other car, this one's for the 12 volts air conditioning compressor. That one's for the dry sump tank. So we get them fabricated before the front end goes on, just because it's a bit easier to access doing it that way. So that's what's going on there. So Sam's doing the stitch brazing in there. He's also stitch brazed all the inside. Bobby's also working on this car.
Bobby's doing the steering column on this car. As I mentioned last time, it's subtly different to the other car, the Project 1 Mark 1 Escort, in that the driving positions are different for the the pair of customers that are having the two cars built. They have different stature, different driving positions. So we have a different steering column position in this car to that car. The rest of the driving position is kind of the same. The seating position is different, but it's within the adjustments on the seat. So I've kept the seat bases mounted in the same place, but used the runners to give the adjustment needed there. The steering column needs to be mounted lower in this car and a little bit further away from the seat. So Bobby's drawn up the brackets for that, drawn them on CAD, CNC cut them on the plasma, fabricated it all, and he's just in the process of finishing off getting that into the car now and getting the reinforcement that connects that steering column to the pedal box in place as well, because we're connecting the column outer structure to the pedal box just to reinforce and tie everything together nicely there. So that's pretty much there. And I think that pretty much rounds up. Jamie's gesticulating. Ah, yes, sorry, yes. I knew I'd forget something. Down in the bottom corners of the engine bay, the gussets between the chassis legs on the front and the bulkhead. It's a standard Escort rally car reinforcement piece. Because the chassis legs are prone to flex a little bit there. There's a limit to how much force you can feed into the bulkhead there, because you are feeding it into a fairly weak piece of structure, but it does nonetheless help reinforce the chassis leg and just helps to stop it cracking at the joint on the leg. So put those, Sam's also got those gussets welded into the back of the engine bay. Yeah, we're getting very far through the metalwork on this. We're probably, realistically, we've got to get the front end on, and then realistically it needs to come off the spit and have all the underside work done. But we also need to do an engine mock-up on this car just to finish off the top of the transmission tunnel, because the fit round the gear lever is very precise, and we need to get that actually mocked up with the mechanical parts in place just to make sure that everything's correct. So that's pretty much where we're at on that. We'll march this way. No, I'll come back to that. We'll come back to that bit. So over here, we have Churchill, and Stu's been busy doing various things. Inside here, he's mounted you can just about see it through the headlamp hole. He's now mounted the modified Land Rover air cleaner housing that you'll recall from last week we'd recreated. We bought the Land Rover air cleaner housing, modified it, and then he's made the mountings for that. That's all in place. The water drain's done on it. It's all in place, and he's mocked up the ducting, made sure that'll all work. And yeah, really happy with that. That's come out really nicely. So that's done. He's then moved on to doing these sections, which are, I'll run around here, this piece, which is the bottom rear section of the wing, which does the joint into this, which basically will join. On a Mark 2 Jag, the wing is one piece all the way into the sill, and that's a leaded joint there. So that all just looks like one piece. So he's done the sills, got those on, you saw that last week. He's now made this piece and got it in place, pretty much ready for welding, a little bit of finishing at the front, but basically ready for welding. And then that is an example of the same piece, made up, 18 gauge steel, rolled, folded, shaped, folded at the back, cut out, notched out for the weld to the sill, and then he's rough formed the shape for the bead to match the wing. That's been modified actually on this car anyway, but he's mashing it into the wing for a start, and then we'll go from there. So yeah, hammer stretch work up there. That's a case of using a small blocking hammer to stretch that in, get the fold correct, and then get a shrinker in there to pull the curve on and make sure the curve stays on along there, and then that will be finished off with a blocking hammer and then a small ball-ended hammer to tidy it up, and then planish it out over a suitable radius stake inside the underneath of there to tidy it up. So he's cracking on with that. That's looking really good. He's also been on with getting some spot welding work finished off. He's done the spot welded the rear valance, because there was the lower edge of the rear valance hadn't been spot welded previously, just because of the way things fell. I think the welder was being used somewhere else. So he's got that done, because he's had the welder connected up, the spot welder connected up, spot welding the lower sill seams. He's got that all spot welded now, spot welded the rear valance. Really moving on quite markedly, and he's now working on the trailing arm mount, the radius arm mounts. This car, as you'll remember from previous episodes, we've retrofitted with an independent rear end, which we've pilfered from a I'm going to be corrected on the date now, early 60s presumably, I think, mid 60s Jaguar S-Type. Apparently it came off a police pursuit car, a Jaguar S-type pursuit car. It's got a power lock limited slip in it as it came. We'll be rebuilding it, but it came with a power lock in it, which was handy, and quite a nice ratio as well. We'll be stripping that, rebuilding it, but it's mocked up in the back of the car at the minute, and the radius arms on the S-type wouldn't be compatible with the rear chassis rail structure on this, which used to hold the quarter elliptic leaf springs. We're obviously not using the quarter elliptics because we've got the independent rear end in it. So we're trying to not cut out the complete rail where the quarter elliptic's mounted, because it's quite a lot of work and it's unnecessary work if we can work around it. So what we're actually doing is putting some bolt bosses through the channels where the quarter elliptics used to sit, and we're going to make our own radius rods that mount to the inside of that channel. And then mount to the original radius arm mounts on the lower control arms. So they'll do exactly the same job as the standard radius rods, but they'll be easier to fit into the existing structure of the car, so we don't have to sort of butcher's an exaggeration, but we don't have to modify the structure so much underneath. We're going to clean those boxes up, remove the rear rubber, the mount where the rubber on top of the quarter elliptic sat. We're going to take that out so we've got a bit more room for the radius rod to travel. And clean it up and generally tidy up under there, but we're going to keep the fundamental chassis rail extension channels where the quarter elliptic sat. So that's all looking good. I think that pretty much rounds up where we're at on this. I'm bound to have forgotten something, but hopefully nothing too major. As you can see, the front end's screwing together, but we kind of saw that last time. That's there's one or two little I's to dot and T's to cross before we can actually get that welded on. But it's certainly getting very, very close now. That's where we're at on that. Pick up my coffee because otherwise I'll forget it. Onto the Escort. Tom started out the week seam brazing inside the car. In parallel with Tom doing the seam brazing on this car, Andy Hall, his business is Vintage Machines. He was here fitting the first of the modified wheel arches, to getting that welded up on the near side. And then he got that welded in and metal finished while Tom carried on with the seam brazing. And once he'd probably 75% metal finished that, he then brought the second arch in, got that welded in while Tom picked up the metal finishing on that. And then while Andy was there just to sort of oversee things and make sure that there weren't any calamities in terms of the wheel arch, make sure that he was handing us a suitable, the handover was at a suitable point. There were no problems, which there weren't. Everything went perfectly on that. So Andy's welded this one in and then handed straight over to Tom on this without doing any planeting. He's just handed it straight over to Tom. He's happy that Tom knows what he's doing. Obviously we're happy that Tom knows what he's doing. We're happy with the work that Andy's done. So everything's great there. Andy's now taken a front wing, so he's got some datums for the actual envelope of the front wing, because he's now started work on the front modified wheel arches, and so he's going to be cracking on with that, so that we can then hopefully by end of next week get the front wheel arches here and start grafting them into the wings. We'll have to get them tacked up with it on the car, with the wings on the car. We'll get them all tacked in on the car, then we'll take it off and weld them out on the bench. Weld and planish them on the bench. It'll be a lot easier to get at. Tom's in the more final stages really of metal finishing this. If you get the welding right and the welding perfect, so there's no distortion, then the metal finishing is very easy and very quick, and there's not really much to deal with. So that's really how this has gone. So he's getting well through that now. In parallel with that, I've been doing a bit of work. Andy also, once he'd got finished both wheel arches, brought the hammer form tooling for the rear wheel arches back, because the second set of rear wheel arches we're going to make here with a bit of sort of overseeing from Andy to make sure we know what we're doing. Because we've not really done a lot of hammer form work before, and we're appreciating Andy coaching us a little bit on that. He's very, very helpful and been very kind in coaching us a bit on that. So while we've got those tools there, as a little gentle break in, I've used the same tools to make the inner arch lip, because we need to make the lip that sits inside here to join the inner arch to the tub structure inside there. So making a pair of these, which isn't metal finished at all at the minute and doesn't really need it because it's an inner arch. This is actually, that's the one for that side of the car, far side of the car. Yeah, it's not trimmed or anything, hence the slightly odd shape. But that's the inner arch lip for that side of the car, made on the same hammerform tooling as the outer, so it fits perfectly inside the outer arch. And then we'll make the arch tub come across, and then there'll be a radius lip. We'll put a radius onto this lip and weld the two together all the way around, and that'll give us the joint between the arch tub and the outer wing. We can have a spot welded seam around the edge, like any normal production vehicle would have, any sort of steel body production vehicle would have around the arch lip. But loads of wheel clearance, because the inner is very similar, is almost dead parallel to the outer. For sort of up to there, the two are almost against each other, so you maximise your wheel clearance. So that's been done, as I say, on the same epoxy tooling as the outer, and I think that pretty much wraps up. I'm bound to miss something, but I think that pretty much wraps up where we're at on that. Over here, you can see a Porsche 911 Turbo, which Rich has been working on this week. He's been dealing with the horrific underseal, the seam sealer applied by Porsche, which is very thorough and supplemented by, what would you say, a copious quantity of sealer added by various bodgers thereafter. Yeah. Yeah, semi-structural sealer. The car had been tinkered with, shall we say, in terms of some sill repairs, which were pretty much bonded in with sealer, you know, an inch thick in places, and Richard's had to burn and dig and scrape and hack the sealer out from the sides of the heater channels and the sill structure to get it back to metal, so it can actually blast it, because we can't blast sealer away. The blaster won't touch rubbery sealer. So it all has to be scraped and got rid of first. Now it's possible to burn the car in an oven to do that. We're a bit hesitant to do that when we don't know various things about the car. The manual process can be a little bit kinder. So Rich has done it using blowtorch, scraper, and lots of draft outside in the freezing cold. I think his hat froze on Monday. It was quite chilly. But he's got all that scraped, burnt, cleaned off, then blasted that, day before yesterday, running into yesterday, Thursday today, blasted it, day before yesterday, running into Wednesday to finish the blasting, because we ran out of grit. I hadn't got the grit ordered in time, basically, but we also had to revisit a few bits of seam sealer and reburn some more out, such is the job. Unfortunately, very hard to see that you've got all the sealer out the first time, so you sometimes have to go back and scrape a bit more out, then carry on blasting, which is done. And then the areas we don't want to blast, which are the quarter panels and the roof, he's now just finishing off paint stripping, scraping and sanding. So he's just at the detail, scraping bits of glue and remaining sort of trim from around the sunroof off, and then getting on with the sanding the remains of the paint off. I mean, we probably could have blasted the wings, because I strongly suspect they're going to be scrap anyway. But it's not our car to make that decision on. It's a customer's car. It's actually a repeat customer's car. He's just brought it to us for blasting because it had some accident damage that he wanted. Andy Hall will be doing the metalwork on this, and it was really just for accident damage. But he's now no doubt going to be quite disappointed to discover that there is quite a lot of rust in the shell as well. So, as is always the case with these things, it rolls rapidly into full restoration. So that's where we're at with Porsche, and that's why it's in the background. It's not a project that we're doing. We're sort of helping out a customer by doing the blasting and cleaning work, ready for it to be carried on elsewhere. So that's where we're at with that. And then moving on into the body prep bay, we have the Charger. So I'm going to not open the curtain too far, because we're doing some wet flatting in here now, so we want to keep dust out of here as much as possible. The car was in primer, it was already in primer when you last saw it. The Raptor had been done last week, hadn't it? On the video last week, we'd done the underside Raptor and the inside Raptor. That's all looking great. And the owner, Alan, popped by on Monday to have a look at it, and I think he was pretty happy with it, wasn't he? I didn't actually get the chance to talk to him for very long, because I was wrapped up with somebody else at the time. But he seemed very happy. The guys wound him up a treat and told him we were painting it orange and putting some numbers on the side and all the standard wind-ups. But he was very happy. It's now been dry blocked. Step back a little bit. The sealer work's been done. and the car's been dry blocked, and now it's been wet blocked all over, ready for final paint. So next video, I think, all being well, as long as nothing goes disastrously wrong, next video you should see it in its final colour. So yeah, coming on well. It's just acres and acres and acres of sanding, as has been the case from the start. It's just a lot of meticulous work, and at this stage particularly meticulous, just checking everything over, all the final checks, make sure there's no little pinholes, no little missed bits and corners, all the usual nitpicking, because it's always the way, you always spot any defects after the paint's on, never at the point just before, so the level of detail work's quite critical at this stage. But yeah, watch this space for next week when this should be coloured. So until next week, see you then.